Buenas and welcome back. This is the last session for today, and it is entitled Musical Traditions. This panel is chaired by Dr. Kimberly Keeling. Dr. Keeling is the Executive Director of Humanities Guahan, a position she held since 2005. She is a scholar of Micronesian history and culture. Keeling has 25 years of experience working with cultural heritage organizations and institutions throughout the Pacific Island region. She is a Fulbright scholar and earned both her MA and PhD in anthropology from the University of Hawaii at Manoa and her BA in anthropology from the University of Arizona. Please welcome Dr. Kimberly Keeling.
Thank you so much, Lavon, for the introduction. Half a day and welcome to all of you who've been able to join us for this very interesting and exciting session on musical traditions in the Marianas. I'm happy to be coordinating it. We have three presentations in this session. The first one is entitled Long-Term Effects of Colonization on Music, Transformation and Adaptation. It will be given by Lynne Jessup Michael. So Miss Michael studied ethnomusicology at the University of Washington and did her fieldwork in the Gambia, West Africa, where she worked for the Oral History and Antiquities Division of the government. Her focus of study was the Mandinka Balafon, resulting in the publication of her book, The Mandinka Balafon, an introduction with notation for teaching. She moved to Rhoda in 1986 and since then published The Ramayana as Told by Lynne Jessup and Memories and Music, the Japanese Era on Rhoda. Join me in welcoming Miss Michael.
Thank you. I'm going to attempt to share my screen here. So I'm going to talk about the effects of colonization because the acculturation and adaptation began for Chamorro culture with the Spanish. The first Europeans who sailed to the Mariana Islands made no mention of the music. And as Dr. Taitano pointed out in her presentation on Tuesday, the historical narratives of the period constitute archival silence, meaning that the lack of documentation of this important aspect of culture has been erased or silenced. So we don't know very much at all about the very beginnings. The first mention of Chamorro music was made by Father Peter Koemans, who described feasts where the Chamorros danced and sang with accompanying gestures and a type of castanets. Koemans also mentioned poetic songs that told of fables or myths and funeral songs sung during a 7-day period of mourning. When the Catholic missionaries arrived, they discouraged what they thought of as pagan music. So Father Diego de Luis Sanvitores wrote in his account, Mission in the Marianas, he did document music. He described 12 or 13 women forming a circle and singing in verses their histories and antiquities with point and harmony of 3 voices, sopranos, contraltos, and falsettos, with tenor taken by one of the men. He was critical of their singing when they sang of Puntan, who may have been the first man, and he described those songs as bad verses and said they were antique fables and deeds of ancestors sung at celebrations. At funerals, he said they sang melancholy songs and dirges that were ingenious and deeply felt. However, his attitude was that the indigenous music was pagan and should be supplanted with religious music. Children were taught songs to honor the Holy Virgin Mary, our mother, at services in the Royal Chapel of Mary, which I think was in Agana. Slightly later, Charles Le Gaudian, a French Jesuit priest, in 1700 wrote, At first, the natives shyly held back upon the arrival of the ships and did not want to come aboard. San Vittoris, however, encouraged them to sing the litany of the Virgin, and soon they approached, mixed with the Spaniards, and sang with them. Upon entrances into the village, Christ's message was sung, which had been translated by San Vittoris into Chamorro verses. All came and listened because they liked the music. They loved the singing. During their festivities, 12 or 13 richly decorated women form a circle. Without moving from their place, they sing the songs of their poets with grace and schooling which would please even in Europe. In the hands, they have small shells resembling castanets. All onlookers, however, are charmed by the expressive bearing and movements which accompany the singing. The men also entertain themselves with dancing and competitions. In jumping, running, and wrestling, they proved their strength. They recounted the adventures of their forefathers and recited the songs of the poets. With their subjugation, these pagan customs disappeared and spiritual songs resounded in place of the impure secular singing. Ligobian also stated that the missionaries taught the seminary students to play European musical instruments. Father Garcia Salgado, the rector of the Agana Church, hired someone to teach the students to sing the Mass on Sundays, on Saturdays, and some feast days. Thus, much of the Chamorro vocal music was lost due to the emphasis on the music of the Catholic Church. Not all music, however, was related to the church. One type of music that endures through time is children's songs and games, which are passed along by word of mouth from generation to generation. An example is the coconut passing game, Ambus Clap, which I recorded on Rhoda in 1987. Many of the words no longer have meaning. Some of them have meaning in Chamorro and in Spanish. So it's probably a mixture of the languages. I played this song for a group of music educators in San Diego, and one woman who was from Mexico said that she recognized the song. So it's most likely that it was taught to Chamorro children during the Spanish colonial era, and it still survives today. Here it is.
Ambas from Dabayam Parete Ababa Ajiwa Iba Ramba Triple Trap Ambas from Dabayam Parete Ababa Ajiwa Iba Ramba Triple Trap.
Okay. Jacques Argal visited the Marianas Islands in 1819. He wrote extensively and published his observation in a narrative of a voyage around the world. I found this manuscript on the internet and I spent 2 nights up till 1 o'clock reading it. It was so interesting. He stated that music is one of the most agreeable amusements of the inhabitants of the Marianas. They sing the moment they awake, they sing during the hours of rest, and they fall asleep singing. Their airs are languishing, harmonious, and for 3 voices. There's the 3 voices again. There are also 2 or 3 boleros and some seguidillas, but in general, they prefer that which lulls and composes to that which animates and enlivens, and their singing may be considered in some measure an emblem of their life. Now, the most well-known vocal music of the Chamorro culture is the chamarita. It too has changed over time. What remains of this long-standing vocal tradition is the words, the poetic form, and a basic melodic pattern. Traditionally, it was a song used as a flirtation between young men and women, often while they were working in the fields, weaving palm fronds, net fishing, husking corn, grinding coconuts, or other communal work. 2 singers, often a young man and a young woman, would toss verses back and forth, improvising new words upon the previous verse sung by the other person as a way to show wit and humor and the singer's ability. It incorporated layers of meaning and double meanings. figurative expressions, and slang expressions that only the younger generation understood. It was also a way to transmit hidden message, not only among the young people, but later during the Japanese era to send messages that the Japanese would not understand. Usually the man began the song and the woman responded. Sometimes others joined in at the end of the line. The last person on Rhoda who was able to improvise in this manner was Bartolo Ogle. Now when people sing, they sing a set of verses. They don't make up their own words. Repetition is a method singers incorporate when improvising lyrics to give them time to think up new lines. Some chamaritas use repetition this way, repeating the last line of one verse in the first line of the next verse. In his chamarita, Dingu y Compañera Mu, Isidro Manglonia repeats part of line 1 in line 3. Another trait Japanese chamaritas have in common with other improvised vocal forms is that often successive verses within one song do not relate to each other. For example, in the song Estebaceso How Mange, as sung by Ursula Atterley, it begins with the first 4 verses connected by topic, but the next 6 verses are all independent of each other. So chamarita is definitely not a narrative form. Sometimes stories or events are alluded to, but more in terms of personal allusion rather than a method of telling a story. The subject matter is personal, often dealing with love, courtship, marriage, or abandonment and loss of love. Now I'm getting into detail here. So the poetic form is a quatrain or a 4-line verse. In her research, Kim Bailey compared the verses to the Romantic form of Spain and Mexico. She described the form as quatrains of 2 octosyllabic couplets. There are 2 8-syllable couplets per quatrain. However, many examples sound more like 2 longer phrases that are rhyming couplets. Isidro Manglonia of Rhoda took only 1 breath and held 2 notes in each verse. You can often figure out the way the verses go by listening to the singer's breathing. Other singers, possibly due to their age, breathe 3 times in 1 verse. Examining the lyrics, rhyme scheme, and melodic contour help to determine the general form. But the rhyme schemes are not always consistent. Occasionally lines 1 and 3 rhyme, but in almost every case, line 2 and 4 rhyme. Other rhyme scheme can be all 4 lines rhyming, alternating rhymes, or an AABA form. These are not common patterns, however, and the lines could be construed as not 4, but 2 lines that rhyme, rhyming couplets. Musically, this could be true, as the melodic line would indicate 2 musical statements rather than 4. Examining the melodic structure reveals a strong Spanish influence. Much of Spanish folk music is in the Phrygian scale or mode, rather than the major minor scales, which are the standard scale structures of Western European art music. The Spanish Phrygian scale employs half steps between the tonic note and the second, between the 5th and 6th degrees of the scale and the 6th and 7th degrees. This is an incorporation of an Arabic modal system introduced to Spain by the Moors. Don't forget, the Moors were in Spain for a long time, and that was during the time that they were coming over here. Some listeners unfamiliar with Spanish folk music have mistakenly thought Chamorro singers were singing out of tune. It is well to remember that the music of other cultures does not have the same musical structure as Western European art music. It wasn't even art music, it was folk music of Spain. Another Moorish influence in Spanish music is the use of vocal ornamentation, embellishment, melisma, slides, and other performance practices that are vocal. These techniques were also audible in the singing style of some of the older recorded Chamorro singers. Here's example 2. This is Isidro singing Isidro Manglonia.
Dingoy kumpanira mo basta'y konversasyon. Salangin na habwa na may satyumiling at tentasyon. Basta'y konversasyon, dingoy kumpanira mo. Salangin na habwa na may satyumasawgi karira mo.
You can hear him sliding around on those notes. It isn't that he, that was the style of singing. So referring back to Argall's account, he stated that the Chamorros sang boleros and some seguidillas. These two musical forms are from the fandango family of music from Spain. As a dance, the fandango was a courtship dance, which may have had Moorish origins. As a vocal form called cante, fandangos had three brackets. There were the serious ones called solarias, intermediate, which was fandango, and light, which were alegrias and bulerias. The fandango was sung in coplas or couplets and were in the Phrygian mode. So the subject matter of fandangos was improvised and satirical, religious, or romantic. Bulerias were also improvised in 3 or 4 8-syllable verses in the Phrygian mode. In the Chamorro culture, the term fandango is the name for the party the night before the wedding. The use of the term is a strong linguistic clue that the chamarita is closely tied to Spanish folk music. All of these musical similarities point to the close ties between Spanish flamenco style and chamaritas. Now, the German period was quite brief, and their musical influence is more obvious in the marching dances found in other areas of Micronesia, like the Marshall Islands. But George Fritz, who was the district captain in Saipan, was very interested in Chamorro culture. And he wrote letters to his parents, which were more informal, and recounted dancing and singing at a wedding in Rota. He said that the dancing included a Scottish polka, and the waltz was accompanied by a concertina and violin. He also mentioned German songs that were sung at every mass. In his Chamorro, A History of the Ethnography of the Mariana Islands, he discussed the Chamorro love of music and stated that at every feast there was music, singing, and dancing. He noted that at fandangos, while the people were eating, an orchestra, which included a violin, accordion, guitar, and triangle, and sometimes an organ, performed. After eating, the dancing started. He noted that the dancers were all European, including polkas, mazurkas, contra dances, and the Spanish fandango, danced by the wedding couple. In reference to vocal music, he wrote down the lyrics to a song which he thought was the only remaining Chamorro song, and the words are very similar to the chamaritas of the 20th century. He said he thought he had heard the same song in South America. So this is again the evidence of the strength of the Spanish influence on Chamorro music. Referring back to children's music, there's a Chamorro game, Esta Bala Para, which actually has the same rules as a game played, still played, called Die Golden Brook in Germany. And it's a similar game in Colombia, El Puente Está Quebrado, and the English version is London Bridge. So I'll just play a little bit of it. It's really quick anyway.
Picala, picala, oa, en la picala pot. Ay, mi amor. Ay, no, kino, di balen. Dom, pinin, domino.
Okay. Japanese era, this is where we come up to the point of time where were actually people that lived through it on Rota when I arrived in Rota in 1986. So I actually got to record people singing examples that they learned from the Japanese time. One of the most interesting ones is Hotaru ni Hikari, which was a very popular song in Japan in the 1930s, and it's still sung there today. It's interesting because it's really cross-cultural. It started in Scotland and was brought to Japan in 1881. The scale of it is pentatonic, and so since it was a pentatonic song in Scotland and a lot of Japanese music is pentatonic, it was very easy for the Japanese to learn it. So it became very popular, and it was taught to Rinaldo Manglone.
Hotaru no hikari, mado no yuki, fure musuki, kasane sutsu.
You recognize that? Old Lang Syne? So Old Lang Syne made it all the way from Scotland to Japan and then to Rhoda. Other songs maintained a Japanese melody, but put new Chamorro lyrics in. And an example of that is Flores Rosa.
Flores nai hubaiza. Kuna tiempo na hula nanga. Sahagu solo ibinazaku ihalo milinadan.
You can probably hear how the words had to be adapted to the melody because it was words in a different language. A lot of other Japanese songs were taught to the Rhodanese school children, hiking songs, humorous songs, war songs, and even songs about their childhood. Here's one, Moshi Kameo.
Kame-sanyo, sekai no uchi de omai hodo, ayumi no noroi mono wa nai, no shite son nani noroi no ka.
Okay, and then there were some other songs that the soldiers taught them that just told how they were homesick for Japan. When the Americans came, they also brought their influence to the Mariana Islands, both folk and popular music. And an example of an American folk song with new Chamorro lyrics is Palesian Riku, which is sung to the tune of the old folks at home, but it's got its own words. After that time, then popular music with all the GIs and radios and everything that happened after that, the American influence became really strong, and a lot of songs were popularized either with translations of the oral or original lyrics or new words. An example is Si Nana G Familia, which Johnny Sablan sang, and you can even still hear it on the internet. A lot of the 1950s songs became have new words but the same tune, and some words they just translated the words, kept the tune and the words, but translated them into Chamorro. So as with other aspects of tradition, music changes with the influence of other cultures, borrowing melody, harmony, instruments, lyrics, and form, and adapting it to the current music of the culture. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any questions for Lynne from our audience via the chat? We have a lot of thank yous. Sius Masi Lynne for the great work, research, and documentary of the Chamarita on Rhoda and the book and CD that you and your team of interviewers and contributors produced. This is from Francis Sablon. And then Melanie Henga, who's going to be joining us for her presentation in a little bit. She gives you a hearty thank you and how your presentation was awesome. Any other questions that we have from the audience? You can submit them via the chat. It was very interesting to see the changes and the ways in which Chamorro music adapted throughout the different colonial eras and the influence that each colonial administration and peoples had on traditional Chamorro music. So thank you for that really insightful and interesting presentation.
Welcome.
Oh, so we have a question. Where can we find the book and the CD mentioned by Francis Sablon earlier in the chat?
Oh, I've got a copy right here. Ta-da. It's available through the CNMI Humanities Council and on Rhoda at the Community and Cultural Affairs Museum and at St. Paul Elementary School Library.
Okay, fantastic. Then we have another question by Troy Lizama. What was the song that was sung while the Spanish were offshore again? What was the name? What was the name of that song?
Offshore?
That's what he says. What was the song that was sung while the Spanish were offshore?
Not really sure.
Okay, so maybe Troy, you could clarify your question for Lynne. So we have another question here. Can you cite some of the German influence on music in the Marianas?
Well, like I said, there wasn't a lot of German influence that you can hear today. And so their influence was more in other parts of Micronesia where you can see it in the dance and the marching songs. But the Spanish influence was really strong and really dominated the culture because it was so much longer than the German, and also because the Catholic Church and their attitude was so dominant, and that had a huge influence on the music.
Right. Well, that seems to obviously make sense. We have a comment here by Melanie again, saying that our Falawash song, Sinser, is a borrowed German tune from Lily Marlene.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And then Francis is saying that the CNMI anthem is a German tune as well.
Yeah, the thing where the big break comes is when you start hearing everything in the Western European scale system, because the Spaniards didn't use that. And even the Catholic Church was more modal. The Gregorian chants and all the old Catholic music was modal rather than do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. So that part of it, there's one song I recorded that has solfege, the do, re, mi stuff in it. And that might easily have come during the German time.
And I missed this earlier. We have a question from Yumiko. That she heard elders in the Northern Mariana Islands sang Okinawa songs very well. Did you collect songs influenced by the Okinawan people?
Not sure, because most of my Japanese songs were sung by Albert Tobus and Reynaldo Manglonia, and they learned their songs from the Japanese rather than in school. And the Okinawans came as workers, so they would have learned those in a less formal. But they didn't. They talked about learning them from the Japanese in the Japanese school.
Okay, and then Troy has come back to clarify his question. In the Spanish era segment, there was a song that the Chamorro people sang and later had the Spanish join in. That is the song he's referring to.
Yeah, he didn't say what it was called. It was just that
okay.
they were coming as a celebration and that they joined in singing, and they were just like in a processional, and they sang it with as they walked, but he didn't say what the name of the song was.
Okay.
So probably religious.
And then we have a question from Michael Clement, who will also be joining us for the next presentation. What light can you shed on Rodolfo Mundo's oku, a singing style passed down in his family for generations?
Well, see, this is where it would take a lot of real analysis, but the idea of sliding around on the notes and the flattened sixths and the ornamentation of the melodies, those go way back to the Spanish style. When I first came to Rhoda and I heard the music, I thought, wow, this sounds like flamenco music, because it's the same tonality and the same treatment, and it comes all the way from the Moors of North Africa. When you get into that ornamentation and that sort of, it's sort of like a blues sound. It slides around on the notes. It doesn't go do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do at all. Oh. And that kind of singing, because a couple of people that wrote about Chamorritas said, well, one person in particular said they were singing out of tune, probably because they were old. No, they were singing their way, which has more notes than do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And so Spanish music, and it's the folk music, not the art music. The folk music has this style to it that, especially the vocal music.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. This is from the Northern Marianas Humanities Council. There were waves of Filipinos that lived in the Mariana Islands during the Spanish era. Was there any influence on local music from the Philippines?
This is where the thing about archival silence comes in, because the sad part of it is there's a lot of other kinds of cultural artifacts that you can see pictures of, or you can see evidence, house architecture, all of those things, they're remnants. Music, if it wasn't recorded, and it's an oral tradition, right, it's gone. One of the interesting ones is ancient Egypt, because ancient Egyptians actually wrote down about their music. And then in hieroglyphics, you can see the flute players and how their fingers went. And they're able to reconstruct how ancient Egyptian music sounded by looking at hieroglyphics and reading about it. But there's nothing written about old Chamorro music. Before anybody recorded anything, nobody knows what it sounded like.
Well, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're running out of time to take any more questions, but thank you so much, Lynne, for your really informative presentation. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.